Hello everybody, welcome to Totally Tabled. My name is Shaggy, and today I'm doing another top 10 list. This time, top 10 two-player only games. Now, technically, some of these games play at different player counts, but for me, I'm only going to play these games at two-player and no other count. This means that a lot of great two-player games are not going to be on this list because they also play great at maybe solo or 3 or 4. But I think there's a unique feeling that comes from a game that was specifically designed for 2 players. So let's just jump in right away. My number 10 is a game that I think might have been a little bit forgotten, but it definitely hasn't been forgotten by me, and that is Raptor. This is a game by the two Brunos, Bruno Cathala and Bruno Feduti, and it's got artwork by Vincent Dutrait. So we got some heavy hitters on this very light, simple, almost abstract game. One side is playing scientists that are trying to put baby dinosaurs to sleep and capture them to study. The other side is playing the mama dinosaur that is trying to protect her young dinosaurs and get them to escape the scientists, either by leaving the board or by murdering all the scientists on the board. It's a really fun theme, and it's got an amazing card mechanism that I just don't think I've seen in any other game for some shocking reason. It's so cool. Both sides have a deck that's numbered 1 through 9, but each card has different special abilities. You're definitely playing with very asymmetric sides. So you select a card secretly out of a hand of 3 cards, and then you reveal simultaneously. The player who played the lower number, they get to activate the special ability that's on the card that they played. The person who played the higher number gets action points, equal to the difference between the two numbers. So let's say you played a 2 and I played a 5. You would get to execute the special ability on your 2 card, and I would get 3 action points to spend on a bunch of different actions, which would be different depending on which side I'm playing. It's super simple. It's like a half an hour, so super quick, and just a whole lot of fun. And that card system is so great as you're trying to outthink, like, ooh, I really want to do this special ability, but what are they going to do? You have to be really careful when you play that real low card, because if your opponent comes and plays really high card, they could be getting 6, 7 action points, and that could be absolutely devastating. So just a really fun, light game. Highly recommend it. That is Raptor. My number 9 is a classic, so I won't spend too long talking about it. It's 7 Wonders Duel. The original 7 Wonders is a card drafting game, which typically doesn't work that great with 2. It was kind of, not quite as exciting. You kind of want more players for a drafting game typically. So in Duel, they completely changed the way that you do the card drafting. And now you have these cards set up in a grid with the cards overlapping. And so at the beginning, you have a small selection of cards to draft from. But as players start taking cards, you're uncovering other cards that are further up in the tableau. And so as you're drafting, you're having to be very careful about what you uncover for your opponent. Trying to draft in such a way that you're forcing them to uncover something for you that might be exactly what you need. The other cool thing here is that there are multiple ways that the game can end. Right now, when you take a military card, you're pushing this military track sort of back and forth, like sort of a tug of war. And if you manage to push that marker all the way across to the end of your opponent's track, you just instantly win with a military victory. You can also instantly win with a science victory by collecting a certain number of different science symbols. And then if neither of those things happen, you still have points, and you can win that way. So that just creates this really incredible tension as, you see someone going for the science victory, and it's like, okay, I got to keep science cards away from them. And so you have to be very careful. Okay, there's a science there that they need. How do I draft these cards in such a way where I can force them to make sure that I take that card and they don't? Pretty cool stuff. It works really great. This is definitely the way to play 7 Wonders at 2 rather than the base game. And in fact, I think I like 7 Wonders Duel maybe a little bit better than the base game. That's my number 9, 7 Wonders Duel. Number 8 is 1960, The Making of the President. This is a game about the United States presidential election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Obviously, one player plays Nixon, one player plays Kennedy, and you have this massive map of the United States with all these tokens on all 50 states showing, the number of electoral votes that each state gets, and you're just battling it out trying to win these states. It's using a card system that is, very similar to like Twilight Struggle or 1989, where you're playing a card and you're using it either for its event, or you're using the campaign points that the card has in order to do a bunch of different actions on the board. Trying to gain support in different states, or increase your lead in certain issues that were important in the day. This game is much more simple and straightforward than those other two games in Twilight Struggle. It's also a lot quicker. And I love this theme. I can't even think of another game about American politics that I enjoy. This is really it. And I think it captures it, nicely with some really fun and interesting card play. So that's my number 8, 1960. My number 7 is an abstract game, and I typically don't really care for abstract games that much, but, leave it to Vlaada Chvátil to make an abstract game that I love. This is Tash Kalar. Now, like I said in the intro, technically you can play a kind of 3 or 4 player version of this, but I have no interest in that. This is strictly a 2-player game for me. And it's such a fun one where you have this hand of cards that represent different patterns that you're trying to play out onto the board. So you're playing these tokens onto the board, trying to create those patterns. And then when you do, you can play the card and summon a creature that will have a special action, maybe a move or an attack. And you're not just trying to defeat your opponent's pieces. You have these objective cards where you're trying to achieve these certain goals, which can be all sorts of different things, like have a certain number of pieces on certain spots on the board. Like there are these colored squares. Maybe you need to be in control of 3 or 4 of them, or to create some kind of pattern, like a line across the board, maybe defeat a certain number of pieces in a single turn, things like that. So you're looking at your cards, you're trying to make these shapes, you're trying to figure out how you can, have one card sort of piggyback into another and get your pieces where they need to go to make these certain patterns. It's a lot of spatial recognition, and it can be very difficult, but it's so awesome when you pull off one of these more difficult cards and you just get everything to line up just the way you need it. And boom, you hit that and something appears on the board and it does a thing, and then you get an objective. It's very, very satisfying and fun. And the more you learn the decks and the cards, and you know what you might be able to possibly do, and you know what your opponent might be able to possibly do, and once you get to know the decks a little bit better, and you can sort of anticipate what your opponent's trying to do, and you can anticipate what might be coming up in your deck and try to set up for different things, man, it's just got so much depth here. You got to check out this little abstract game from my favorite designer. That's number 7, Tash Kalar. Number 6 is a little bit of deja vu, because this is also an abstract-y game about putting pieces out onto a central board and attacking. This is a classic Neuroshima Hex 3rd edition. In this one, you're not forming patterns like in Tash Kalar. Rather, you have these units that you're putting on a hex board, facing them in certain ways, and they will attack with different timings and in sort of different ways. And you're drawing these pieces out of a bag, you're placing them onto the board, and then eventually someone's going to play a battle token. And then everything on the board is going to attack. And it's going to attack in initiative order, and they're going to have special abilities. And so you're sort of building up, and then boom, there's a massive attack where everything's going off, pieces are going off the board, things are getting destroyed, and then you do it again. There's tons and tons of different factions with completely unique play styles and special abilities, which makes this game infinitely replayable. I think I have every faction. I haven't played with them all, but I think I have every single one of them. And it's just so cool. You just pull out two factions, they'll play radically different, you have a completely different game. Just makes this game super fun. There's also a great app that I used to play. I haven't played it in years now, but again, my kind of abstract game where it actually doesn't really feel like an abstract game. It kind of feels pretty thematic if you get into the factions and the world. But anyway, that's number 6, Hiroshima Hex. My number 5 is a war game, and that's really a genre that I don't play a whole lot of, but I'm really smitten with this one. This is Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan. This is a block war game about a war that took place in 1600, I believe. I'm not very familiar with the history, but what makes this so awesome is it's not just a block war game, but there's actually sort of 2 levels of fog of war going on here. If you've never played a block war game, your units are represented by blocks, which means that your opponent can see the number of units you have, but not necessarily the strengths of those units. But this takes it one step further in that you have a hand of cards. And in a battle, in order to activate those units, you have to have a matching card. So you'll play a card which will then let you activate a corresponding unit with the same icon. You might have a huge stack of troops, but they might be fairly weak, and you may not have the cards in your hand to even activate them in the first place. So it's really difficult to gauge just how powerful, a stack of units might be. And you can see, if your opponent doesn't have a lot of cards in their hand, then, you can safely attack, knowing that there's not a lot that they can do. But they might have that one powerful unit and the card to back it up. There's even a card that is a loyalty challenge that you can play to force your opponent to play another matching card for a unit. And if they can't, then that unit defects onto your side and you get the power of that unit. So there's this little bit of bluffing going on there where they may play a card to activate a really powerful unit. You play that loyalty challenge, forcing them to play another card of that. So if you don't have 2 cards of matching for that unit, it can be a little dicey. Does your opponent have that loyalty challenge card? Really interesting stuff. And it's absolutely gorgeous. Now, putting these stickers on like 200 blocks was one of the worst nightmares in gaming that I've experienced so far. But once it's all stickered, it looks amazing. And oh man, how great would it be to have like a deluxe version of this game with like fancy pieces, and that would be amazing. Someone else doing this list, they would have a ton of war games, right? Not me. I don't really play war games, but this is one that I will gladly play anytime. So if you're like me and you're not really drawn to war games, I would still check out Sekigahara. It is a special one. And that's my number 5. My number 4 is big, it's epic, it's long, it's IP based. This is Star Wars Rebellion. And this is just Star Wars in a box. Now here's the thing, I'm not even that big of a Star Wars fan. I like the original trilogy, fine. The new stuff I don't care for. But even despite not being a Star Wars fan, I love this game. If you are a Star Wars fan, then this is nirvana for you. But even for me, the game is just that good. One side's playing the Rebels, one side's playing the Empire, searching for the Rebels throughout the galaxy, trying to find their hidden base. You're building Death Stars, you're blowing up planets, you're having space battles. The Rebels are, hiding, trying to do these missions in various different areas, trying to disrupt the Empire. It's so fantastic. I love the sort of the cat and mouse feel here on just an epic scale. You have this huge map of the galaxy, tons of planets, and all the characters are there. It's just so thematic. there's definitely a big learning curve, and it's a difficult game to get to the table because it's just so long. But man, the experience is so worth it. There's a reason this one is super popular. That's my number 4, Star Wars Rebellion. My number 3 is a dexterity game, and it's Clask. Dexterity games just don't get talked about enough in our hobby. They are such an important part, and yet on a lot of lists like this, you just never hear about dexterity games. But the fact of the matter is, Clask is one of the best games ever made, and it's definitely one of the best 2-player games. Clask takes something like air hockey and just improves on it in every way. You have these magnets that you are holding underneath the table to manipulate a little pawn on top, and you are simply trying to get the ball into your opponent's hole. But there's a couple of complications. One, if you fall into your own goal, your own little hole, then you've lost. But there's also these 3 other little magnets out there that will attach itself to your pawn, and if you ever get 2 of those on you, then you also lose. And so you can focus on trying to get the ball into your opponent's hole, or you can also focus on trying to hit those magnets into your opponent. And they create these little they're like little landmines where they're bouncing around the board, and suddenly parts of the board become a little dangerous. You can't really go over there. And it takes your focus away from the other part of the game, the ball. And so it's just these 2 different things that you have to worry about, that you're trying to do. It creates such a exciting, fun, and often funny game that you can really play with anybody. It's one of these that, is easy to play, but also very difficult to master. And it's easily one of the most played games in my entire collection. I play this with my kids all the time. They play with each other, and it's just always a blast. Can't recommend this game enough. That's my number 3, Clask. My number 2 is another historically themed game. This is Versindas Volk. I apologize for that pronunciation. So this is a game about Germany after World War II. One player is playing East Germany, one player is playing West Germany, and the game actually stretches throughout the whole history, up until the fall of the Berlin Wall. But each side plays fairly asymmetrically. You're trying to exert your influence over the other side by building up your side faster, trying to deal with unrest and put out these standard of living tokens, which will then create unrest in the other side, because you're trying to show that your way is superior. So it's like this very fascinating sort of politics going on, and it's all driven by this card system that, again, is very similar to something like Twilight Struggle. If you're wondering why that game isn't on the list, it's because this game has replaced it for me. It plays in half the time, and your decisions are just more interesting to me. And just what you're doing is more interesting. There's a lot more going on. So like I said, you have these cards. You're either playing the event, or you're playing it for its points, and you're using those points to do different actions on the board, like build up these factories, build these roads between the factory, which is sort of increasing your economy in the different provinces, which is letting you play these standard of living tokens. You have all this unrest on the board, so you're trying to remove the unrest and add unrest to the other side. Again, this is another one where, there's definitely a learning curve here. There's a lot going on, and it takes a couple of games to sort of get your head around it all, but it is so worth it. This game is incredibly satisfying, and I'm telling you, if you like games like Twilight Struggle or 1989 or even 1960, like I mentioned before, this has a very similar card system, and I highly recommend you try this one. It's incredible. Check it out. It's my number 2, mispronouncing it again, Versindas Volk. And my number 1 2-player game of all time might be a game that you've never heard of. Certainly one you've probably never played. This is a living card game, but not from Fantasy Flight. Not one of the big ones. This is Doomtown Reloaded. This is my favorite collectible card game style game. Better than Magic the Gathering, better than Netrunner. This one doesn't feel like any of those other ones. There's a very strong spatial component to this game. It's a card game, but it doesn't feel like a traditional card game. Certainly not like a traditional collectible card game. And that's probably why it appeals to me in so many ways. Normally, I'm not one for constructing my own deck. I usually don't enjoy that. But here, I love creating my own decks. And it's hard to sort of describe why I like it so much. I think it's because it's fairly straightforward. Every card in Doomtown Reloaded is also just a standard card from a standard deck of cards. So as you're constructing your deck, each card is multi-use, and you're sort of building a regular deck of cards that you're going to be using to play poker, because in this game, you resolve combat, like shootouts and stuff, you resolve it by basically playing poker with your hand of cards. And so you can build a very stacked deck. You know, you have a lot of the same suits, so you can build better poker hands because you kind of have a cheating deck. And building a deck like that is really fun because, you know, when you go out there playing poker, you're getting 4 of a kinds, you're getting 5 of a kinds, you're getting all sorts of nonsense. And that's great. You can build your deck like that, but you're making some big sacrifices by doing that. It also gives you direction for your hand. You can really easily build a hand around a specific card. You can be like, oh, I really like this card. This card's really cool. I'm going to build an entire deck around this card. And so you will try to get other cards that are of the same number and suit, or cards that are around that. So you can, you know, build straights and flushes and things like that. You're going to put in cards that complement it. And it's, I don't know, there's just, you can build these really wonky, crazy decks that just have like a very specific idea. And I just love that. It just makes the deck construction so much fun. The other thing that sets Doomtown Reloaded apart is the theme, which is so fantastic. This is the Weird West, right? This is the Wild West with magic and advanced technology and just all sorts of crazy stuff. And the different factions that you can choose really play into that, right? You got your standard, like, you know, cops versus robbers thing kind of going on. But then you also have like a corporation that has all this advanced tech. You also have a faction that's just a very bizarre, creepy circus that's in town, where you just have a bunch of different freaks and crazy magical abilities, which are called hexes in this game. So you just have this absolutely wonderful theme, and the cards are super thematic. You have so many different personality cards here. The characters are so fully realized and fleshed out and interesting and unique. You really get attached to your characters. And the game is so fantastic at telling an incredibly cinematic story. Everything is very grounded in a sense. You have a card that's a horse. You have a card that's a pistol, you know. You have a card that is the saloon that you're going to go to. You know, it plays out in your mind. You can see it as if it's, you know, a movie on screen. It should be a movie, right? You wish it was. It's that sort of thing. And no other game captures that. Magic the Gathering doesn't capture that. Netrunner is way too abstract. This is grounded, it's real, it's got people with items interacting with other people at very specific locations. It's so great that way. This is the most thematic card game in existence. And every game of it plays out like an episode of just the best television show that never existed. I don't have time here to explain all the rules and exactly how it works, but you're basically playing out locations onto the board, and your characters are then moving around to those different locations, trying to control the town. So the board, the map that you're playing on is expanding as the game goes on. As you're playing these different locations to your side of the street, you can move and control the locations on your side of the street. You can also move into your opponent's locations, try to control those. And then you can move into each other's locations and have shootouts to try to get rid of the people to take control of those locations. And the way you have shootouts, like I said, is by using your deck to play out poker hands. And you can cheat at those poker hands, but there's also cards that can call people out for cheating. So you're sort of pressing your luck if you cheat, right? I could come out with 5 kings, right? I have a 5 of a kind, and that's legitimate. That'll beat a 4 of a kind. But if my opponent plays a card that gives them a special ability if I cheat, that could wreck my hand and swing the combat. It's so much fun. Now, the downside is that there is a definite steep learning curve here. This is probably one of the more complicated games to learn, and you really got to invest the time to learn the rules. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that can happen. But if you put in the time and you get invested, it is just so fantastic. But if you're interested in a complex but super rewarding thematic card game, it doesn't get better than this. Absolutely fantastic. My favorite 2-player game, Doomtown Reloaded. So there you go, 10 2-player only games, or at least games that I will only play 2-player. Man, this is a list with some absolute incredible games on it. All of these are high up on my list of all-time favorites. If you enjoy this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, check out my other top 10 lists or some of my videos. I do playthroughs and reviews. Check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.